On this episode of the OnePeterFive podcast,
I just burst out laughing. Honestly, I sat here laughing at how ridiculous these people are, and how brazenly obvious. I mean, we've talked about this before. They don't just lie to us. They lie to us in a way that makes it obvious that they're lying to us.
Hilary White on the photoshopping of a letter from Pope Benedict endorsing Pope Francis.
Cardinal Parolin is basically launching a nuke at a fly. It's ridiculous to hire the world's second largest law firm to take care of one very small independent news source that just happens to be a little bit irritating to those who are trying to push a leftist agenda.
Michael Hichborn of the Lepanto Institute talks about the Vatican's legal threat to Infovaticana, a Spanish-language Catholic website.
They told us that it was not possible to reach an agreement unless we disappeared. The only agreement was to disappear, to close Infovaticana.com and to start, if we wanted to, another website. It's not an option for us. We are going to fight.
Gabriel Ariza, founder of Infovaticana, talks to us from Madrid about their fight for survival. The OnePeterFive podcast is back with a vengeance. Stay tuned.
You're listening to the OnePeterFive podcast.
It is a real joy for us to welcome you all here. Habemus Papam.
Rebuilding Catholic culture, restoring Catholic tradition.
Isn't that a beautiful piece of music? This is O Magnum Mysterium by Frank LaRocca, an American composer of In This Place, which I have been listening to a lot lately. It's an impressive piece of work from a modern composer, and I want to promote it. This album is fantastic. Hi everybody, it's Steve, and it's been a while since we've done a podcast. I am now back on the East Coast, which is a good thing, but we're still getting settled in here. I have my home office and home studio set up here, but my children are also here, so don't be surprised if you hear yelling and screaming and gnashing of teeth in the background, because there is not a soundproof room. Well, there's not a soundproof room in this house, but there's certainly not one that's powerful enough to stop them from making the noise that they make. So I should probably label the episode. We're at number 45. We're entering the fourth year of OnePeterFive, the fourth year of not just our articles, but our podcasts. This is a year that I'd really like to see more. I'd like to do more of this. I would like to have podcasts on a more regular basis. I'm finding, though, that the time that it takes to put these together, it's somewhat prohibitive, because I'm either writing, I'm editing, or I'm podcasting, and they seem to be mutually exclusive. So this week I've been working on this, and part of my dilemma here, part of my problem has been that I have a new setup. I got a new microphone, which I hope will help to eliminate background noise, since I am working in a home studio environment. For those of you audio nerds out there, it's a dynamic microphone. I had a condenser before. Condensers have a wider pickup pattern and are more sensitive, supposedly, I'm not that smart about this stuff, but they are supposedly more sensitive and they pick up more background noise. So I got a dynamic microphone, a decent one. And I got a soundboard to go with it so that I can mix everything all together and make it sound right. And that mixer has been the bane of my existence since I got it over the weekend. I received it. And I have been, testing things out, and then I needed audio cables, and I'm currently living in a very rural location where the closest Walmart's over half an hour away, and there aren't any electronic stores around, so I'm having to order stuff from Amazon, and then I get a cable and I try it out, and I'm like, oh wait, I need to hook this up differently. So it's taken me the better part of a week to get this set up, and I think I have it working now, but every time I think I've got it working, I go to try something new, and then something suddenly doesn't work. I'm hitting record and no audio goes through. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Right now it's looking okay. So we're going to stick with it. So I want to talk about today two things. I'm going to focus the podcast today on a couple of things. The first is going to be the situation with Pope Benedict. For those of you who are not familiar, and I doubt any of you listening to this are not, there was a letter that Pope Benedict wrote recently in response to the Monsignor Dario Vigano, who is the prefect of the Secretariat for Communications at the Vatican. And he had requested from Pope Benedict just basically his thoughts and interpretations on this 11-book volume called The Theology of Pope Francis, which has just been published recently, and so Pope Benedict wrote back to Monsignor Vigano and said some very complimentary things about Pope Francis and about his capacity as a theologian and philosopher, and about his papacy and its continuity with the papacy of Benedict himself. This has been, I don't know. I mean, it's not surprising to me, but it's been very controversial. It has been a controversial letter, and I think that it's been controversial primarily among people who still hold on to the idea that Pope Benedict is sort of some kind of, either that he's still the Pope, still a Pope, he's not, that he is being held captive, that he's some kind of savior of the church, that, any moment he's finally going to step forward and reveal the evil plans and talk about how he's being held against his will and forced to come out and, say things that endorse the disaster of the present pontificate. These are the people who seem really upset by this letter. And I think it's interesting because in our line of work, we sometimes have to publish things that get denials, right? We get denials from Vatican officials. We get denials from Vatican communications. We even had a denial from Pope Benedict several years ago about our story about Father Dollinger and Fatima. And Pope Benedict's alleged denial at the time, I had said, I thought it was fake. It didn't sound like him to me. And then I heard people say later, well, actually, he hasn't been so hot on Father Dollinger's recounting of events and et cetera. So I don't know. I don't know whether it's fake or not. People who know him say that he actually did seem to reject that accounting of events. Okay. But we've had other stories that we've had denials, and people say, oh, well, see, the Vatican issued a denial. You can't continue to say that this is a thing that happened. But denials for people who don't care about the truth, that's just the cost of doing business. It doesn't matter. Now, of course, I would prefer to believe when a denial happens that they're telling the truth. I certainly would prefer to believe the Vatican is telling the truth, but we know that this Vatican is not known for its truthiness. It's just not a thing that they do. They have a very loose and relative relationship with the truth. So at the same time, I'm watching all these people, everywhere, on social media, on Facebook, private correspondence, people saying, oh, I don't think he wrote this. I don't think Pope Benedict wrote this letter. I don't think it's him. I've read him. I've studied him. There's no way. This isn't how he sounds. Forget the fact that he's a 91-year-old man who, is allegedly partially blind in one eye. His health is supposed to be good for a man of his age, but he's fading. The whole point of the abdication was that he's supposedly not healthy enough to live up to the physical rigors of his pontificate. So the idea that his style is going to be the same, the idea that he's not going to suffer from grumpy old man syndrome, which it's a real thing. Anybody who's ever dealt with, a parent or grandparent who's an octogenarian or, in their 90s, it becomes a thing. They lose their patience and they become a little testier, and they don't always do or say things the same way. And it's interesting because originally it was an excerpt of Pope Benedict's letter that was released to the public. And it's weird because the letter is short. The letter itself is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's not even really 5 paragraphs because 2 of the paragraphs are 1 sentence each. There's 3 paragraphs and 2 sentences. That's the full letter. It's now been released. And it's not that long, but they excerpted it anyway. But let me read you what the full letter says. Because I think the full letter, having read it now, it actually seems to me more credibly an authentic letter from Pope Benedict than it did when I had just read the excerpt. So, let's see. Vatican City, February 7th, 2018. Reverend Monsignor, thank you for your kind letter of 12 January and the attached gift of the 11 small volumes edited by Roberto Ripolle. I applaud this initiative that wants to oppose and react to the foolish prejudice in which... This is where it gets good. I applaud this initiative that wants to oppose and react to the foolish prejudice in which Pope Francis is just a practical man without particular theological or philosophical formation, while I have been only a theorist of theology with little understanding of the concrete life of the Christian today. The small volumes show, rightly, that Pope Francis is a man of profound philosophical and theological formation, and they therefore help to see the inner continuity between the 2 pontificates despite all the differences of style and temperament. However, I don't feel like writing a short and dense theological passage on them because throughout my life it has always been clear that I would write and express myself only on books that I had read really well. Unfortunately, if only for physical reasons, I am unable to read the 11 volumes in the near future, especially as other commitments await me that I have already made. I am sure you will understand and cordially greet you. Yours, Benedict XVI. So, what do we have here? One of the things that people are reacting to is this notion of the word foolish being sort of vulgar and out of character for Benedict to use. One priest said to me that in the Italian it comes across more like stupid. But I've seen Ratzinger get upset. I've seen him be dismissive. There's that famous video clip of him when the reporter was incessantly asking him about Father Maciel when he was still head of the CDF, and he kind of, it's light, but he gets annoyed and he slaps the guy's hand away and says, stop talking to me about this now. The man is not, without emotion and not without reaction. And so for him to say that this thing is foolish, which in a sense poses both he and Francis in a negative light, I don't know. I don't think that that's that out of character for what I've seen. He has the capacity to become annoyed, just like any of us. And as an intellectual, I think that people who read intellectual works by academics, they don't always recognize that while their writing may seem very calm and collected, many times they don't have a great deal of patience for people who don't get it, people who don't get what they're trying to say, people who ask stupid questions. You know, that thing, that saying of there's no such thing as a stupid question, that was created by somebody who asks stupid questions, because there are stupid questions. I've heard many of them in my life. Stupid questions are often things that are, obvious, easy to answer. Just think about it for a minute and you'll know. So I don't think that this language about, this being a foolish prejudice, that Pope Francis is just a man of the people but doesn't really have theological formation, while Benedict is all about theory and book learning and has no actual understanding of what it's like to live in the Christian life. These are caricatures that we've seen. And he's just saying that it's dumb. It's not true. Okay? So the next paragraph is big. That's the biggest one, really, because he says that these the small volumes show rightly, and I think rightly is the key word. They show rightly that Pope Francis is a man of profound philosophical and theological formation, and they therefore help to see the inner continuity between the two pontificates, despite all the differences of style and temperament. So let's break this one down. The small volumes show rightly. This means that I'm going to use that to dismiss all the critiques that I've seen of somehow he's using coded language and he's being passive-aggressive. He's saying that there's a justification and a correctness in these volumes showing Pope Francis to be a man of profound philosophical and theological formation. Now, you and I may very well disagree with that sentiment, with that belief, but it doesn't mean that it's not what Benedict believes. It doesn't mean that at all. And then he says that they help to see the inner continuity between the two pontificates, clearly referring to his own and Francis. Now, I've seen some people say, "Oh, inner continuity. That inner is, that's a key word right there, because maybe he's expressing something." I don't know what they think he's saying. Inner continuity is a phrase that exists in contrast to the last clause, the last part of that sentence, which he says, despite all the differences of style and temperament. Style and temperament are external. They are exterior. They are matters of form. Inner unity and exterior unity. The papacies of Francis and Benedict look very different from one another. They do. They look different. And what I see him saying here is, despite the fact that they look very different, we actually have a lot more in common than you think, and these volumes are going to have to, they'll make some progress in showing how. This is not... I'm really mystified by the need for this to be some kind of conspiracy or fiction. I don't understand it. This is a man, Ratzinger has, since his abdication from the papacy, expressed on multiple occasions that he's okay with what's going on, that he's okay with Francis. He had that one moment where he talked about how he feels safe in his presence. I don't know. I want to say safe and warm. I don't remember what the exact language was. I'll have to look that up. But something about him feeling safe, He has dismissed multiple times the idea that he's under any kind of coercion. He doesn't seem to be anything but content, frankly. And people get really, really mad when you say this. I've had some people get very upset with me, who I thought we had stronger relationships rooted in the truth of the crisis and what's going on. And I was even blocked by someone on Facebook simply because I'm arguing that I think that this is an honest letter and it exposes something that's actually true. The last part of this letter that I'll break down just briefly here, and then I'm going to have Hilary White on to talk about this later. because she wrote a fantastic article about this whole thing. So this last paragraph, he says, however, I don't feel like writing a short and dense theological passage on these volumes, because throughout my life, it's always been clear that I would write and express myself only on books I had read really well. This is a totally fair statement. Some people are seeing this as a dig. Oh, burn, he's not going to read Francis's books. No, I think what happened is it's 11 volumes. He has vision impairment. He's not going to read this right now. It's not a priority in his life. And he's merely expressing the fact that he doesn't like writing endorsements of things that he hasn't given enough time to. The entire context of this letter tells us that he's read some of it, because he's saying that these volumes are demonstrative of certain principles that he agrees with. But he's saying he hasn't read them really well, and that he has other commitments, and who knows how much time. So I think that there's no bombshell here. There's no bombshell here, at least in terms of, oh, look, he's written this thing in code and we need to get our decoder rings out. No. I think the only bombshell that you might see here is that he's saying what many of us already know. And that is that there is continuity. That is that, as Hilary White says, the church couldn't survive another conservative pontificate that just continued to keep all the poison right below the surface. Just toxic. And it's killing us. It's killing the church. So Francis comes, and all of a sudden all this stuff starts coming to the surface. And among the things that are coming to the surface, the big red pill that nobody seems, well, not nobody, but many people seem unable to swallow yet, is that there is continuity between these papacies of the last 50 or 60 years and the papacy that we're looking at now. There's continuity. We don't get to Francis without Paul VI, John Paul II, and Benedict. And we know that Benedict's papacy, at least exteriorly, again, style and temperament, was the best that those of us who are immersed in the traditional understanding of Catholicism, it was the best for us because it had Summorum Pontificum. It had that return to the trappings of office. It had the more correct theological approaches to issues. We saw the return to those receiving communion from the Pope kneeling and receiving on the tongue. There were these little gestures, these little things. There were liturgical moves in the right direction. Comparatively speaking, Benedict seemed to be a more intelligent, theologically informed, and conservative, if not traditional, Pope than John Paul II or Paul VI. I think that's a matter of perspective, though. It's parallax error. If you're looking at a field full of low shrubs and there's a 10-foot tall tree, that tree looks pretty tall. But if you stick that tree in a forest of 100-foot tall oaks, it looks like a sapling. Benedict was the best post-conciliar pope. I don't think anybody disagrees with that, except for the extreme progressives, the St. Gallen Mafia, who wanted him out and wanted Francis elected. But we're talking about, it's not so much apples and oranges, but Mensheviks and Bolsheviks. Ratzinger was part of the revolution. He was a self-described progressive who never left his progressive ways behind. He simply says that everybody else, all of his peers and colleagues that wound up getting themselves into trouble, went further. They kept going down the road of progressivism, and he sort of stayed where he was in the 60s and 70s and didn't leave that. And so as the church changed, he began to appear more traditional by comparison. Now, I think that's not even an entirely accurate estimate. I think that he did change on some things. I think he came to realize the liturgical experiment had failed. I think that he had the humility to change some of his more liberal views when he realized that they were in conflict with the church in ways that he wasn't comfortable with. I mean, he was one of the first people out there promoting the idea of communion for the divorced and remarried. And then he kind of had a run-in with the Vatican on that, and they said, you can't do this. And so he backed down. And then, he had the humility to say, okay, fine, maybe I'm wrong about this. There were things like that happened. But on the whole, this is a man whose entire pontificate has been centered around this idea of continuity. And for many of us, we look at the so-called hermeneutic of continuity and we say, that's kind of make-believe. That continuity is really, really tenuous to the point where you kind of have to close your eyes and sprinkle some magic dust and, click your heels together 3 times and say, oh yeah, those things are continuous. But he's so big on continuity over conflict. So it's unsurprising that he says, I'm in continuity with myself of 40 years ago. It's unsurprising that he says, oh, the pre- and post-conciliar churches are actually in continuity with one another if you just squint really hard and look at it the right way. It's not surprising that he says that he and Francis have continuity between their pontificates. This is a guy who's terrified by the idea of conflict blossoming into schism and separation. It's potentially why he has been more conciliatory than he should be toward the heterodoxy in the German church and in the prelates from the German church. People called him, God's Rottweiler and the Panzer Cardinal and all this stuff when he was at the head of the CDF. But as Hilary pointed out in her article for The Remnant at Benedict, he really didn't actually do that much disciplining of dissidents. A lot of people were left untouched. So I want to bring her on to talk about that in a minute. You've heard enough from me. The other issue that we're going to be discussing today is what's going on with the Spanish language Catholic website Infovaticana. Infovaticana is sort of our counterpart in Spain. I don't know if it's even really fair to say that because they, I think that they're less critical, actually, of the papacy and of the things that are going on than we are. I don't think that they are exclusively dedicated to the promotion of the old mass and all that kind of stuff. But they certainly have been controversial in Spain, and they have challenged a lot of the liberalizing tendencies of the European church. And they're not afraid to call out the Pope when they think he's wrong. They're about a year older than us. They were founded in May of 2013. But they've gotten hit with this big threat of a lawsuit from the Vatican, filed through Baker and McKenzie, which is one of the biggest law firms in the world. I think they're billed as the second largest law firm in the world. And incidentally, they've represented Planned Parenthood, they've represented the LGBT lobby, they're involved in the push for transgender rights. This is not a law firm that you would hire for your Catholic mom and pop business. If you could afford them, you would go look for a Catholic lawyer who understood and represented your views correctly. And these guys are not them. But the Vatican Secretariat of State, run by Cardinal Parolin, hired this firm, and they went after Infovaticana last year and said, hey, you guys are using the word Vatican in the title of your website and in your domain name. That belongs to us. And you're using logo elements that also properly belong to the Holy See, the crossed keys. So they say this, and the Infovaticana hires lawyers and starts pushing back, and they're like, what are you talking about? I mean, if that's the case, then how is there, Vatican is a place. We're talking about the place. And if you can win on this intellectual property grounds, then there can't be a Washington Post or a New York Times or a Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. The Vatican is a place, and we're talking about what goes on there. And they want them to give up their domain name. They want them to change everything. They've been in business for 5 years. This is a pretty significant hit to their business if they do this. And then they wanted them to change their logo. And they did actually try to make a compromise. They did change their logo. They got rid of the crossed keys. And they replaced it with a sort of a stylized bishop's mitre. It's sort of like an icon. It's pretty plain and simple. And Baker and McKenzie is still saying, well, that's not good enough. And so, Infovaticana is in a fight for its life, because whether or not the Vatican wins this case, they can wear them down. They can utterly annihilate them simply by tying them up in court and costing them tons of money for representation. And, it's a form of censorship. And it's, it's specious on the surface, because there's tons of other logos out there that use Vatican-style keys. And we published an article by Michael Hichborn of the Lepanto Institute where he showed some of these logos. And, if they're going to claim that those logo elements are basically a trademark of the Holy See, then there's a lot of places out there that need to get rid of those crossed keys off of their logos. But none of those people are facing lawsuits. So it seems to be an effort that is designed to suppress the speech at Infovaticana. And most likely it's a trial balloon, to see, can we start crushing these critical websites? So today we're going to talk to both Michael Hichborn, who wrote the article in English about this case, and to Gabriel Ariza, who is the founder of Infovaticana. He's based in Madrid. We had kind of a hard time tracking him down and getting an interview. We have some technical issues with the interview because of how it had to be done. And English is, not his first language. But we'll have him on because I wanted to get his perspective on what's happening. So you got three interviews lined up for you today on this first podcast of 2018. And we'll be back in a minute with Hilary White.
You're listening to the OnePeterFive podcast.
With me now is Hilary White, writer, blogger, international woman of mystery. And she just wrote, I think, the best analysis out there on what's going on with this Pope Benedict letter and his whole situation in a column called Et tu, Benedict, at The Remnant. And I also, Hilary, thought that your blog post, your supplemental blog post, added some good commentary to that as well. So thanks for being willing to talk to me from Italy while you're making and eating your dinner.
You're always calling me at the wrong time.
I'm like a salesman. I try to call during dinner time to make sure people are there.
It worked. Okay, just to clarify, I wrote that piece last week for The Remnant. I don't know.
Because you're a prophet?
Wouldn't that be nice? I don't know what prompted me to write it because, I don't know. I guess someone just annoyed me. Maybe somebody left an annoying message or comment or something and just irritated me. And so I started writing it.
Were you writing it before you and I started talking about the whole, maybe we shouldn't be calling him Pope Emeritus because that's kind of a mistake?
I think I was in the middle of it.
Okay.
I mean, I spent most of the last week on it. Well, kind of on it. You know how when you're writing something that you don't really enjoy writing, that all the time you spend not writing it is also time spent writing it.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah, you can't escape it hanging over your head. Yeah.
So every day I would just try to run away in some way, or like read a book or watch a movie. Or
well, there was a lot of research in it too. I mean, you tied together a lot of things that you had to hunt down.
So anyway, I slogged through this wretched thing, and I had a friend over this weekend, and she can attest that we had to like set the egg timer on the top of the mic. Forced myself to actually sit down at the computer and write the thing. Like, it was that bad.
The Pomodoro technique.
And I sent it off on Saturday. Now, as you know, we heard kind of a little bit ahead of time. Journalists kind of find out these things a little bit ahead of time, and then there's this embargo.
Mm-hmm.
But we found out about the Benedict letter, this so-called letter.
It was, I
Monday
think it was
morning.
the day of, wasn't it? But
we
didn't know what it was going to say.
No, we had no idea what it was going to say. Oh, we did kind of have a little bit of a general gist, because the person who contacts the journalists kind of tells you in broad terms generally what the topic is.
Mm-hmm.
So we find out Monday morning that there's this thing, and we have sort of an idea, and obviously we can extrapolate from what's been happening that Francis needs Benedict to legitimize what he's doing.
Right.
So we sort of did kind of know what was coming, but not until 2 days after I clicked send on this thing. So I didn't write this in response to the letter. It just happened to come out on the same day.
It's strange because in my mind, I'm remembering it addressing this issue, but perhaps it didn't at all.
It really didn't. I didn't mention it one bit.
It just sort of dovetails together, yeah.
There's a little blurb at the top that Matt put in.
Maybe that's why.
Everything. But yeah, I didn't know it was coming, so I couldn't have written about it. And anyway, the letter itself is ridiculous. As an academic, right, this is something that happens if you review books.
Mm-hmm.
Journalists who reviews books. People will send you their books and say, oh, can you look at this and write a blurb? And this is just part of sort of how intellectual life works.
Right.
So he would have, I don't think he was regarding it as this big freaking deal that everybody's wigging out over.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he just received a stack of little books from the Pope that he didn't have time to read.
Mm-hmm.
And
this thing, yeah.
Obviously, somebody asked him, can you write us a note? Okay, sure, I'll write you a note. I'm in complete unity with the Pope, blah, blah, blah. And I'm sure your books are very interesting, but I don't have time to read them right now. And that's kind of just a normal response that one would expect from a cardinal of the Catholic Church with regards to something he just doesn't have time to read at the moment.
Right.
And so this very normal thing.
I actually liked how he said, I don't feel like writing a dense theological treatise about this right now.
That is something for which I, for one, have a great deal of sympathy.
I mean, look.
I can't imagine.
Yeah, it's the grumpy old man thing. He's 91. He's losing his vision. You know, he's still okay, but he doesn't want to sit down and read an 11-book volume of whatever.
Yeah. Frankly, I'm sure that, I mean, I've read the stuff that the Francis gang have been putting out. And that stuff is, apart from all the other stuff that we say about it, it's unreadable. You can't read that stuff.
Yeah, well, I can't. I don't know. I thought maybe he had like the secret decoder key for modernists or whatever.
Right. So don't think so. Because I've read Ratzinger. You've read the Ratzinger. We all have, at least a bit. And the guy can write.
He's definitely clearer, yeah. But you know what you do? You don't know this, actually. I'm realizing that you don't know this because you were out working in your garden all day.
I was.
But the Associated Press has now come out with a report that the Vatican has admitted that they doctored the photo of the letter.
I saw it. It was hilarious. Somebody, like 3 people have sent it to me. I really did just decide to make a flask of tea and put my hat on and boots and go outside and dig around in the garden. So I was out until it was dark, which is about an hour ago. Yeah,
this is a new development just since I even did the intro for the podcast where I talked about the letter, but they said that they released a photo of the letter.
Yeah.
And that they had blurred out the part where he said he didn't want to read it.
This photograph of the letter. And it's just so blatantly obvious that they've set it up so that the quote unquote problematic paragraph of "I can't be arsed to read your stuff." Sorry, Francis. It's covered up with the books.
With the books, but in addition to that,
signature is sticking out.
Yeah,
right?
so you have the signature out from under the books, and people noticed that yesterday.
What does that tell us? it tells us, A, they're trying to hide the fact. It tells us that this letter was a setup, right? The whole thing was a setup. They sent the books to Benedict, asked for this letter. He responded, not maybe exactly what they wanted, but the purpose of it was to garner this letter that says, I'm in unity with the Pope.
Right.
That's all they needed. And they needed to have a visible signature on a piece of paper because they know that he's not, that Francis is losing all kinds of support. So he needs this. And from people who still think that Benedict is the bee's knees as far as Catholic orthodoxy. So they needed that for that reason. And they know that nobody trusts them. They know that everybody thinks they're liars.
And
so
now we know that they're liars.
Stick the signature out under those books so that the signature was visible so people couldn't say, oh, that wasn't really Benedict, which they did anyway, of course.
But did you catch the part where they blurred out the text at the bottom of the first page too?
Yeah. I mean, I saw somebody. I didn't really look very closely at the letter because honestly, I didn't really care very much.
It was not even 5 paragraphs. I mean, there were 2 sentences and 3 paragraphs sandwiched in between. Yeah. It was really short.
So and I guess somebody had put up the photograph that Vigano released. Mm-hmm. I guess I hadn't really bothered to look at it very closely. Somebody sent it to me today and said, "Hey, look at this thing! Ha ha ha! Isn't it funny that they're covering up the bits that now we know are a little bit snarky about the Pope?" To be honest, that was snarky. That was academic. That was polite academic snark, what he was doing there. And I just burst out laughing. Honestly, I sat here laughing at how ridiculous these people are and how brazenly obvious. I mean, we've talked about this before. They don't just lie to us. They lie to us in a way that makes it obvious that they're lying to us. Either they're really bad about it, like they're just really bad at it, they're just too dumb to lie well, or they don't care that everybody knows they're lying.
Well, that's what's crazy about this is that they admitted this. I mean, the Associated Press says that they admitted that they did this. and they never admit that they mess up. Okay. But, all I can think about is I go back to the times when we've gotten denials on things and we've said to people, hey, guys, that doesn't mean it's not true. And they're like, well, the Vatican and the Pope, and they never lie. And it's like, yeah, they do. And this is why we doubt their denials.
You and I and people like us have some advantages. First, we've been doing this a long time. Mm-hmm. Like, I started watching the Vatican really, really closely in 2004. So that's a long time. That's 3 pontificates. Yep. And we are also kind of wise to the way politics works. Yes. To the way media works. Mm-hmm. And we're, unfortunately, necessarily quite a bit more wise than the average person to how the Vatican works. Yeah. Because we've done all this. We've seen it up close for a long time. Mm-hmm. So when we say something like, hey, guys, they're lying to us about X, we get this chorus of people who just haven't got a reason to pay really close attention, saying, well, you can't be saying that. That can't be true. La, 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 la. And we have a negative reaction to that because it's so obvious to us. So we have kind of got a tendency to say, why is everybody so dumb? Why it's just so blatantly obvious. I become a little frustrated with this. Yeah. I become frustrated with people who are good people, who are good Catholics, just wanting to believe that the Pope isn't lying to them. Which is not, obviously that's a healthy impulse. Blame them for that. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah, but it is. I mean, it's frustrating, and then of course you get the chorus of Western journalists and followers of journalism who say, well, they say it's not true, and so now you can't say anything else about it because you can only report on what you know with 100% verified empirical fact is true, and it's like that's not how the Vatican works. They lie all the time, and there's no evidence of anything, and so you say these are what the sources are saying. That's an Anglo-Saxon thing. The Anglo-Sassone epithet in Italian journalism is one that I'm really coming to appreciate because we're so gullible. That's what I was going to say. Is it equivalent to just you're gullible, you're naive? You're just you poor naive rubes who just and you can understand Vatican journalists in Italian kind of have this attitude because, in a sense, there have been Vatican journalists in Italy since Dante. And they really know how it works. They really get it. And we really don't.
Yeah.
So we really are, unless you've been here for a while, we really are backwoods provincials, rubes who just,
So talk to me for a minute about the reaction. I mean, we kind of predicted exactly what would happen.
But we didn't predict it would be quite so intense.
No.
I know exactly what you were going to say. We sat down on Monday morning and said, I bet it's going to be X. And X was everyone denying.
Everyone's saying that he didn't write the letter. That was going to be what everybody was going to say. Mm-hmm.
It wasn't his turns of phrase. This isn't the kind of wording. I mean, how many stupid hours did we waste on Twitter having this discussion?
Hillary, you didn't earn him. I
didn't earn the Pope. That was my fault.
I don't even know what that means, but you didn't. You didn't. Whatever that means, you didn't do it.
I bet Benedict's resignation was my fault because I didn't earn him. I don't want to say anything rude on your podcast. But...
It's okay. That's all right. We're going to rename it. We're going to rename it the Rude Cast and just say whatever we really think.
These people just live in a weird little unhinged universe of their own.
But so this is why I think your article was so important, because the whole thing was about how everybody thinks of Benedict as being this traditionalist Orthodox hero of the papacy in the post-conciliar age. And you took pains to demonstrate with fact that actually, in fact, no, he's not. It's just a matter of perspective. He's better than some. You
don't really have to go back very far. Like I did a little bit of digging. Obviously, traditionalists of a generation ago, pre-me, pre-you, have got all the goods on this. They've done all the reading. They've picked it all apart. People who with what we could call maybe a classical Catholic theological training are able to see the discrepancies. So they go back and look at his published works. There's a couple of trad websites that have been doing this for years, for decades. So I just went kind of to a couple of those. Real traditionalists before Benedict, before Francis, have been gathering this data and have been trying to tell conservatives this for a long time.
But it's not like he hid it. I mean, he said, I was a progressive in the 60s and 70s and I didn't change.
Exactly. And his last speech to the clergy of Rome was all about how if only we got the real council away from the media council and implemented Vatican II correctly, everything would be great. Now, that is just a recitation of textbook conservative denial.
Yeah.
Right?
And I mean, it's the one that we are constantly fighting, this idea that the council should be salvaged and redeemed.
Oh, if only we implemented Vatican II properly, then blah, blah, blah.
It's just like saying if only we implemented socialism properly. It's just never been done.
Well, it's pretty hard not to make that comparison. My grandfather was a socialist, and that was what I heard at the dinner table for years. Communism hasn't been tried and found wanting. It's been found difficult and not tried. So to speak.
So other than the 100 million dead, what's wrong with it? That's the.
But hundreds of millions of lost souls. Yep. Now we're talking about
exactly.
Vatican.
Exactly.
How many more lost souls are we supposed to go through before we finally get it implemented correctly? I mean, what exactly does that even mean? So this is up until his last day on the job, Benedict was saying out loud, "I'm not a traditionalist. I'm a man of the council. I'm all about Vatican II. Only Vatican II is interesting to us people of the conciliar church." And it still wasn't heard.
Yeah. No, I mean, he did Summorum Pontificum, which was great, but then, I'm starting to understand why, though. Why do you think?
I think he wanted a hybrid. I think he brought Summorum Pontificum in, to insert this sort of traditional aesthetic back into the liturgy a little bit more, which it did. And he stated that we ought to have these two rites effectively mesh into a kind of a hybrid chimera.
So you think that he was trying to kill traditionalism through a Hegelian synthesis, basically?
I guess. I mean, I don't know if I would go
because that would
far,
do it, right? I mean, if he could create the hybrid,
Yeah,
it would take out the traditional movement.
I don't think he would say that that was his intention, but effectively that would have been the result, I think.
Interesting. Yeah, but he never once publicly offered a Latin Mass.
The Mass, not once.
Which would have opened a lot of doors for a lot of people who wanted it.
Well, I think that's why he didn't do it. It would have ended a lot of arguments, yeah.
Yeah.
But it would have alienated a whole bunch of bishops. It would have caused all kinds of problems. You got all kinds of priests, young priests.
You mean like putting pressure on him until he resigned?
Under some more pontificate, going to their bishops and saying, well, how about it? And the bishops are still saying, no, no, no. Well, if he had done that, what he would have been doing effectively is siding with these young guys against his own bishops. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, obviously the politics of it is complex.
Oh, my goodness.
I think the Hilary thesis is working pretty nicely. Everything in this pontificate is really ticking over very, very well, according to my little theory, that this is the situation, as painful as it is for everyone now. This is the situation that was inevitable on this path that we've been on for 50 years. This is where it was going. And we're just starting to get people now finally taking these guys at their word.
So this is I think what this all boils down to here. I mean, we've watched people freaking out all over the place. We're seeing a lot of very irrational, and as you phrased it, feminine, attachment to this idea of Pope Benedict being someone that he wasn't.
They all look like ladies to me, even when they're not.
Yeah,
I mean, quite a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, and I've gotten some very angry reactions from people who are otherwise very rational, very traditional in their outlook, fighting for the right thing. But there is this thing where, like, you don't mess with Benedict. You don't say you think that actually, no, he is okay with this pontificate.
I remember we have a mutual friend who works in Rome, and as you know, and at the time of the resignation, everybody was really distraught. We were all getting together. I still lived in Santa Marinella, so we were all sort of getting together at Trinita and at lunch and on the train and stuff, talking about nothing but this. And I remember our friend just kind of popped up in the middle of one of these conversations, and people were really agitated, but they weren't willing to accept that they were angry. And he said, we loved him. We had an authentic love of this paternal figure. Mm-hmm. And that this is a natural, healthy Catholic thing to have. And we loved him. And he betrayed us.
Yeah.
And so what happens when someone you love betrays you? You and I have both experienced this more than once.
Yep.
What do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on who you are, but some people will either become bitter, others will go into denial. I mean,
denial is kind of what we're seeing, right?
Yeah.
But also anger.
Always anger. Anger, unless your denial is deep enough.
You get anger. So this is something I think that is just starting to come out now. 5 years on, the resignation is now again in everybody's minds. And people are kind of, it's sort of being brought up again. So they're revisiting this whole thing. Oh, now I remember why I wrote the piece, because it was the 5th anniversary. And Robert Moynihan had asked me, can you write a thing for my paper? And I said, no, I don't think so. Mm-hmm. It'd be a bad idea. So I wrote this thing for the Remnant instead. But because it's been 5 years and he's done nothing, and it's been such a catastrophe, now people are actually starting to process this anger, I think. I hate to sound like a West Coast hippie here.
No, but I mean, there's got to be something to that, because unfortunately they're taking out the anger on people like you and me who are saying, this isn't really a surprise. This guy is all about continuity, about everything.
Well, he's about, somebody put it pretty intelligently. He's all about continuity back to 1963.
Yeah.
Because he sure did write that the syllabus of errors has to be replaced with Gaudium et Spes.
But I mean, he thought that the pre- and post-conciliar churches could fit under this big umbrella of the hermeneutic of continuity.
That was his thought, but
and it doesn't work.
I think the reaction that people are having now, and the anger that you and I are experiencing, which honestly, water off the duck's back here.
Right.
I understand that. I get it. I know. I remember.
Because you've already felt it. Yeah.
Away. Like, I knew why I was angry 5 years ago. People have been in denial for a long time, with good reason, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're starting to process, this is a really bad thing, and frankly, it's his fault. That's a hard thing for a lot of people to come to.
The problem is that so many times when a father abandons a family, one kid winds up saying, "You know what? He left us. It was him. We're on our own. Stop, crying about it." And the other kids are like, "No, you don't understand. You don't know why you left. You don't know what went on."
Oh, well, I wouldn't know that, being an only child.
But that's the kind of thing, though, that happens.
When I was 15, I've had a long time to process this kind of stuff.
But it is, they're making excuse after excuse, and they're telling us, we don't know. We don't know.
Yeah. We've had every single excuse. And I've said this to some of these people, saying, look, all you're doing is just reciting the standard excuses that people used to make about John Paul II not doing anything.
Is there any doubt in your mind that he wrote this letter?
No.
I mean, I don't have any gut suspicion that there's something weird here. Oh. I'm getting really tired of everybody telling me that he's some kind of a marionette on strings. The guy seems like he's okay with his situation.
Yeah, well, you and I were through it all day yesterday, and I'm really sorry that I wasted an entire day doing that.
I actually think that the latest information really drives home the point that, yes, he wrote it. The Vatican is not going to Photoshop an image of a letter that they wrote. Know how. Well, even if they found, like, they hired someone from India to do it, they are not going to Photoshop a photo of a letter that they wrote for an endorsement.
I mean, honestly, the denial and the excuses and all the stuff that we were seeing online yesterday, Twitter and Facebook and all these comments and stuff from people, I mean, it was just absurd. There's like a list of excuses. He doesn't know. He's kept in the dark. His handlers don't tell him things. How much, he's being coerced. He's being threatened. You could just make a bingo card of all these things from John Paul's pontificate. People used to say exactly the same stuff.
And not one person can submit a single piece of evidence that this is going on. He's not blinking in Morse code when people visit him. He's not writing help on the palm of his hand.
I've read Benedict all my life, and he would never use the word concrete. Apparently, I haven't earned him, so I haven't got anything to say about it.
I don't think I know how I write well enough to say I would never write something.
No, me neither.
For goodness sake.
Somebody else once told me that they recognized my style in something that I'd written for somebody else. And they actually emailed me saying, "Why are you writing for so-and-so under a pseudonym?" I'm like, I'm not. I don't know what you're talking about. Shut up.
I left my cat on the stove. I have to go.
You left your cat. I happen to know you don't have a cat.
No, I don't. I would not ever have a cat. But that's another episode.
Just to everybody who hears this, calm down. I've had people emailing me and sending me messages saying, oh, it's the end of the church. It's the end of the world. I don't know what to make of it. What do we do? What do we do? What did you do yesterday? What did you do yesterday? Does this change anything? Does any of this change anything that's true?
In point of fact, what it does is it emphasizes and highlights what you have been saying all along, is that the church couldn't survive another conservative papacy because all they do is paper over the rot.
Yeah.
And that's what this is saying is, hey, I actually think this guy is qualified and is profound and is a great thinker, and I'm in continuity with him, and it's all good.
I really want people to understand that this does not make the faith, the Catholic religion, untrue. It doesn't. I've had so many people contacting me saying, oh, what do we do now? My response is, what did you do yesterday? What are the precepts of the church?
Yeah.
Do those things. Keep doing those things.
I think there's an expectation that people have of the Pope, has a curtailed free will, and he can only operate within this certain set of parameters and boundaries. And when he starts going outside of that, he's coloring outside the lines, and you're like, whoa, that guy can't be for real. And then it leads to the whole, well, is any of it real? I mean, those are temptations. I've had those thoughts. But you have to go back and look at the entirety of this faith and the recognition that every single time there's some massive crisis in the church, what comes out of it is a clarifying event.
Right. And yes, it's painful. This is maybe the most painful we've ever had. Certainly the strangest situation we've ever had.
Yeah.
But it doesn't make anything that's true not true. It just doesn't. It doesn't even come close.
And we only have one pope.
Yes, we only have one pope. Oh, God.
Just FYI.
Yes, it's a very strange situation. Benedict isn't the pope. He's not the pope.
There's only one sun in the sky. Yeah. No, he did. He resigned. It's done. And I want to stop talking about that. I want to move beyond it. And you know what? I will buy popcorn for people, and we can get front row seats to the deposition trial of Pope Francis, posthumous or not, when the day comes that the church is like, yeah, this guy was a heretic, and whatever. You know what? Do what you're going to do, church. That's fine with me.
I think it's going to be a while.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if I'm going to live to see it, but yeah.
But if we're around, I got the popcorn. That's all I'm saying.
Get lost.
All right, thanks.
Hungry.
All right, go eat your dinner.
Bye.
Bye. I'm Steve Skojak, and this is the OnePeterFive podcast. Rebuilding Catholic culture, restoring Catholic tradition. With me now is Michael Hichborn, president and founder of the Lepanto Institute. Dedicated, I believe your mission statement is to give the USCCB a complex, right? Is that your official mission statement?
In part, yeah, for sure.
And Michael is coming to me from a secret, undisclosed location somewhere in Middle America right now. Is it undisclosed? Does anybody know where you are?
It'll be found out on Wednesday. So
okay, that sounds good. I like having secrets; they're tantalizing.
Yes.
So the thing I wanted to talk to you about is you wrote this article today. Actually, I think you wrote it yesterday, and we reprinted it today at OnePeterFive about this Spanish language Catholic website, Infovaticana, and what they're dealing with from the Vatican. Rather than me delving into it, since you did the research, can you kind of sum up what happened there?
Sure. The basic long and short of it is that Infovaticana, which has been in existence since 2013, suddenly got in the mail a letter last May from the number 2 law firm in the world. It's actually the second largest law firm in the entire world, saying that the Vatican had just become aware that they were using Vatican emblem in their logo, and that they were using the word Vatican in their name, and they would like for Infovaticana to, peaceably and favorably desist from using Vatican symbols. They didn't say anything about not using the word Vatican in the first letter. Then in August, they get another letter from this law firm, which is Baker and McKenzie. Right. And the second letter says, not only must you stop using any symbols that even closely resemble Vatican symbols, So the paired keys that they had, they can't use that. And they cannot use the word Vatican in their name. And as a part of their demands, said that Infovaticana must turn over the domain name to Cardinal Parolin, the Secretary of State of the Vatican, who was the one who was initiating the lawsuit to begin with.
Okay.
So Infovaticana tried negotiating and said, look, okay, we understand. We don't want to confuse people. We don't want people to think that we're affiliated with you, which is kind of ridiculous because when you look at their website and it's all critical of Pope Francis and the things that are coming out of the Vatican and the homosexual lobby and all that, it's pretty clear.
Wait a minute. So hold on. So
Yeah.
La Stampa, which is a huge Italian website,
Yep.
that has a section called Vatican Insider,
Yep.
run by one papal sycophant known as Andrea Tornielli, who likes to publish people like, Stephen Walford, the Pope's personal apologist, the blokiest personal apologist of the Pope on planet Earth. They don't have a problem with La Stampa using Vatican Insider, probably making a lot of money off of that. But there's a problem with Infovaticana using it because, did I hear you say they're critical of the Vatican?
Yes.
It's very strange. This is a very strange coincidence.
I'm sure it's just a coincidence. But the other thing is, so Infovaticana or the Vatican Insider, which is run by La Stampa, is one venue. There's another venue, the Vatican Insider, which is run by Robert Moynihan.
Wait, no. Wait, that's different. Vatican Insider is La Stampa. What is his?
Inside the Vatican.
Inside the Vatican. Yeah, that's right.
Yep. So Inside the Vatican, run by Robert Moynihan. Also been doing it for a very, very long time. Never got a letter from the Vatican saying you must cease and desist using the word Vatican in your name.
Mm-hmm.
So in Infovaticana, through their lawyers, contacted the Baker and McKenzie and said, look, we'll go ahead and take out the keys and we'll take out any symbolism that would seem to indicate maybe even some sort of close connection with the church, but we're keeping the name. And right. Baker and McKenzie's response was, no, you must turn the domain name over to us also. And the bottom line is they have to close their doors. They have to shut down is what they're saying. What's interesting about this is that in this particular pursuit of the Vatican trying to close the doors of this, you go back to where this whole thing started, and it started with the local bishop in Madrid who was upset that Infovaticana had written some articles that were critical of certain things that were happening in the Spanish church. And he contacted the papal nuncio in Spain, who then contacted Cardinal Parolin, and now they're putting pressure on Infovaticana. This is all political.
How similar is this, do you think, to that situation years ago with Michael Voris's operation, where it was Catholic.tv, and then the Bishop of Detroit got upset because they were using the name Catholic and they had to take it out of there? Is it similar? I mean, it's different in a way, right? Because the Vatican is a city-state. It's a nation. It has its own status. And as was pointed out in the article, I mean, you have the Washington Post, the Washington Times, you have the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, you have the New York Times. I mean, people write about things and they put the name of the location in the title. This is a very common practice. But, I mean, is the Vatican sort of claiming a special status here because saying Vatican indicates Holy See approval?
Well, I think that that's part of the argumentation. They're claiming that they own the property of the name Vatican, which is kind of silly considering if you want to talk about the place where St. Peter was executed, you would talk about Vatican Hill. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't necessarily, Vatican does not necessarily mean Vatican City. And in fact, Infovaticana does not say Vatican City in there.
Yeah, but Nero's not around to sue them. So
this is true. This is true. Although when you look at Cardinal Parolin, there may be a resemblance. But the thing about what's going on it reminds me completely of what happened with Vox Cantoris. You remember that?
Yeah, I was going to bring that up, actually. Yeah, go ahead with that.
It reminds me of what happened with, and it was Anthony Demet, I think is his name.
David Demet. Mm-hmm.
David Demet, that's it. He had been writing some articles, and he wound up talking about Father Rosica, and Father Rosica turned around. Father Rosica, who happens to just be a Vaticanista. And
he's not just a Vaticanista, right? I mean, he not only heads up Salt and Light TV, which is a big Catholic TV network in Canada, but isn't he officially part of the Vatican's Secretariat for Communications in some capacity?
Yes, yeah. He's part of their communications. I don't know what you would call it. It's not I guess he's part of the communications office.
I mean, it's probably along the lines, Father James Martin, SJ, is a consultor, I believe is his title, to the Secretariat of Communications. And so what duties that job title entails, I'm not really sure. But
right. Well, Father Rosica, I believe, is slightly higher than that. I think that he actually has an official position because he's acted in an official capacity for the Vatican during the synod. So anyway, he wound up threatening a lawsuit against David Demet and Vox Cantoris because they happened to write an article about him.
So and it dragged on for a while, right? I mean, I remember reading something saying that their back and forth went on for years.
It did, but
leading up to that critical moment. Yeah.
Yeah. Once the lawsuit threat came up, there was a lot of news coverage on it, and suddenly Father Rosica backed off and said, "Okay, we're not going to pursue a lawsuit," and that was the end of that. But
that raises a question, though. That raises a question here. I feel like if you look back at that, and I also thought of that example when I was looking at this, that it's like this is the trial balloon, right? They did the Father Rosica thing. Whether or not it was Father Rosica's own initiative, he was a representative of the Vatican. I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, if he backed off because they were saying, "Hey, this is not the attention that we need on what's going on." I don't know if he would have done it for any other reason, because pressure doesn't always matter to these guys, especially if they have the resources or people willing to donate the resources to pursue a case like this. But he did back off. But now you have this bigger case, more high-profile law firm going after, and Infovaticana, as I understand it, and I have had some interactions with the founder, Gabriel Ariza. We're actually going to be interviewing him later on this show. But he's based in Madrid. His English is so we haven't talked a lot, but I feel like he's kind of a counterpart in a way to what I do at OnePeterFive, where he's this small independent Catholic news website that's looking at what's going on in the Vatican. And, he doesn't have the resources to fight something like this.
Which of us does? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Who does? I mean, honestly, I even think a lot of the bigger media outlets wouldn't want to fight something like this. We know from looking at what's going on with the Knights of Malta and everything else that the Vatican just has billions tucked away under mattresses and things like that. So it kind of makes it a little difficult to go up against.
It raises a very interesting point because when you look at what the Vatican's doing, I mean, Cardinal Parolin is basically launching a nuke at a fly.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous to hire the world's second largest law firm to take care of one very small independent news source that just happens to be a little bit irritating to those who are trying to push a leftist agenda.
Well, it's only absurd, though, if you don't want to send a message that come at us and we'll flatten you.
Well, yes. And I think that really is kind of the message. And it's also, when you think about what's happening here now, Cardinal Parolin hiring this law firm, how much money is going to that law firm? How much money is the Vatican throwing at this particular lawsuit?
Right.
I mean, obviously, it's just a letter right now, but you hire it. This law firm's not going to come cheap, and that's Catholic.
And this law firm is not looking for, pro bono exposure through a case. I mean, they're already huge. They don't need the Vatican to put a feather in the cap of their client list.
But isn't it fascinating that this group, this law firm that he hired, Infovaticana, set itself up in its mission statement, says that one of its intentions is to go after the LGBT lobby. And what is Baker and McKenzie? But the largest law firm in the world that is pushing LGBT rights. And
which
it
is,
actually,
I mean, just that's amazing. Think about it. Think about anybody you know who runs a Catholic business. What are they likely to do if they're going to hire an attorney? What kind of a person are they going to look for?
they're going to look for somebody who represents their interests.
And their values. Somebody who gets it, somebody who's, if possible, a Catholic attorney, because they're going to be on board with what it is that they're trying to do. For the Vatican to hire this firm that not only, as you said, is representing the LGBT movement and the transgender ideology, but they also represent or have represented Planned Parenthood, according to your article today.
That's right. In 1991, they represented Planned Parenthood in a lawsuit against a pro-life activist in San Diego.
It's just, I mean, it's phenomenal that these are the people they're hiring. And I also think, I mean, we're in the business of connecting dots, but we have to look at Cardinal Parolin. Yes, he's the Cardinal Secretary of State for the Vatican, but that's not all. I mean, he's the guy that a lot of people are pointing the finger at, saying he's the heir apparent to Francis when Francis either steps down or he passes away. This is the guy who's the most papabile,
Right.
So he's sending a message, not just now, but in the future. When I become Pope, I'm not going to take this from you guys.
No, that's exactly it. No, I think you're absolutely right. He's not only saying, I'm not going to take this from you, but I'm going to do whatever it takes to squash all opposition. This isn't just a message to the journalists. This is a message to anyone who would stand up to him. All cardinals, all bishops, all priests who would be willing to stand up to a man like this is going to get flattened, and flattened in a horrific way.
So do you think, I mean, obviously we want to do what we can to support Infovaticana in their efforts here, but it's a David and Goliath story, to be sure. And it already was before this litigation started. I mean, any of us who are trying to point out what's going on in Rome, we're fighting against a media juggernaut as it is. But I mean, do you think that this is the beginning of a trend? Are they going to start doing this to all of us?
I think that remains to be seen. As you pointed out earlier, it's probably a test case. I think that one of the things that we see from these people is that they probe a lot. If you understand anything about tactics in the Zulu Wars, one of the reasons the Zulus were so successful against the Brits is that they didn't care about how many men they lost. They would throw a whole bunch of men at one particular area and wait for the British to come up and fire their guns. And then they would count how many guns they had on a particular line. And that would tell them exactly what they needed to do and where to attack and how to attack. And I think that that's what we're seeing here. The Vatican is throwing probes here and throwing a probe there, doing this or doing that, and they're counting the resistance. They're measuring the resistance that they're going to be met with in any particular scenario so that they know how to handle it going forward. I think that this is a test case.
So they're doing this so that they can learn from the experience.
That's right.
I mean, but this isn't the first time we've seen something like this. I mean, think about it. I mentioned the Knights of Malta a few minutes ago, but I don't remember if you spoke publicly about your interactions with that whole story. But I know of several journalists who, in trying to cover what happened between the Vatican and the Knights of Malta, wound up being threatened with lawsuits to keep them to shut up and not talk about the things that they'd learned.
I got threatened as well.
Yeah, and I didn't want to out you on that, but I mean, you're the third journalist that I'm aware of off the top of my head who faced that, and I think that's also pretty significant, and it's also a situation that Cardinal Parolin is deeply involved in. That's
right, because the person that was behind the threat for me, at least, happens to be very close with Cardinal Parolin, and was intimately involved in part of the financial dealings that took place prior to the blow up at Malta. So I don't want to get too specific on it.
No, you can't. I mean, that's the thing. They're using, the threat of litigation And this is the thing. I don't know how many people understand this. This is something that I didn't always understand. It doesn't matter whether they have a case that's going to win in court, right? All that matters is that they grind you down and that you don't have the financial resources to fight them. You could win the case and be bankrupted by it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and when you look at the way that this particular suit against Infovaticana was set up, it wasn't designed specifically to go to court and to be fought out in a court battle. It was designed to bully him, to push him around, and ultimately what will wind up happening is there will be filings here and filings there, and it's a war of attrition.
Do you think, I mean, in a case like this, is it worth it to fight in the hopes of, I mean, essentially getting a Pyrrhic victory? Or, you know, should Infovaticana say, fine, you know, we'll change our name to something else and we're just going to keep fighting you on our own terms?
Well, okay, so there are a couple of ways to look at it. If they stand their ground, they could duke it out in court. There will be a lot of money involved, probably. I think that because Baker and McKenzie has a pretty strong reputation for muscling their way, that they would win. Baker and McKenzie, I mean. And at which point, I don't know if they would have the resources or anything else to be able to start up and do it again. But in the meantime, what winds up happening is that the Vatican gives itself a black eye by squashing a little man, you know, just a small organization that's trying to do the right thing by allying itself with the enemies of God. And when they do that, do they really think that the rest of the journalistic world isn't going to pay attention? Because I'm going to keep talking about it. Are you going to talk about it?
Yeah, of course. But the problem is that there's only so many of us who care.
This is true.
I mean, the Vatican gets away with all kinds of stuff right now that they shouldn't get away with because people don't want to report on it. I mean, look how much effort it took for Pope Francis to take the heat he deserved for the Chilean situation with the abuse victims. Yeah, it was May of 2015 when the New York Times first reported that he called the people of Osorno, Chile, stupid for believing the accusations against Bishop Barros. But it was only on this most recent visit when he again accused them of calumny and everything that people actually started paying attention to what he said. They've given them a long leash and a lot of space to make mistakes.
Well, and you know, that actually raises another issue, and that's the fact that the Vatican really and ultimately is only responsible or culpable to its own self. It already pulls a tax in from all the dioceses around the world, and we Catholics have an obligation to tithe. So, really, what has it got to lose?
Well, I think we can tithe in other ways. I mean, that's the way I look at it. I'm not going to fund Peter's Pence, you know, when we're having reports that it may or may not have been used to finance Hillary Clinton's campaign, you know, or other things that we've seen reporting on. I mean, I'm not going to give money to people out of you know, an obligation to give money to God who are actually actively going out and trying to harm the faith. That's not going to happen.
Right. So the question
there, you got to do the right thing.
Right. And the question there becomes, is the Vatican really all that interested in the money coming in from the people around in the pews anyway?
And if not,
how much money is the Vatican pulling in from government grants? And, you know, when they're not looting long chivalric orders of knighthood.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. I mean, and when they're looting, I mean, honestly, for an amount that's equivalent to what, like $30-40 million tops. And I've even heard some accounting since that it's less than that because there were a lot of fees paid out of that money. So I mean, is the Vatican that desperate for money? I don't know. I mean, we know the U.S. bishops were getting boatloads of cash for refugee resettlement, although I've read that under the current administration, a lot of those programs have gone away and they're losing those.
Yep.
Which is an interesting thing.
Yeah, that's another story. But the USCC was
it is another story. But you level, what is the equivalent thing that the Vatican might be, you know, getting money from?
Yeah, and that's the valid question. That's the $1 million question, really. I don't know where their financial sources are, and anytime anybody looks into the Vatican Bank and Vatican resources, suddenly they have mysterious charges brought against them, or they wind up dead.
That shouldn't make me laugh, but it's kind of hard to believe that we're living in a Dan Brown novel.
Yeah, that's weird. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. We'll keep an eye on this story. I appreciate you giving us the background on it.
You bet. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey, podcast listeners. Most of you know that OnePeterFive is a tax-exempt organization. We're set up in the United States as a 501c3 dedicated to educating the public about the Catholic faith and the events that shape it. It also means that donations to OnePeterFive are tax-deductible where permitted by law. We provide our content for free in order to reach the greatest number of people possible with the truths of our faith. Our website is viewed hundreds of thousands of times per month, over 7 million times last year alone. We're among the loudest voices leading the fight against the corruption of Catholicism, but we need your help. As a reader and listener-supported organization, we can't do this work without you. If you believe that what we do here is important, I'd like to ask you to pause this podcast right now and go to onepeterfive.com/donate to show your support. No donation is too large or too small. Every bit helps us to advance our mission of rebuilding Catholic culture and restoring Catholic tradition. Thank you for your support. With me now is Gabriel Ariza, editor and founder of the Spanish-language Catholic website Infovaticana. Gabriel comes to us from Madrid. Gabriel, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Steve. It's a huge pleasure for me to share these minutes with you. Thank you.
Gabriel, can you tell me a little bit about your website, Infovaticana?
Of course. We started this adventure 5 years ago, 2 months after Pope Francis became the successor of Benedict XVI, and we have been focused on specifically in Spanish church information and also in Vatican information. We have been identified as very combative because we're free. We don't depend. We are laymen, and we don't depend on advertising from the church or from any, so we can denounce with firmly the corruption inside the church, specifically, and those who, instead of serving the church, use the church for serving themselves.
So you say that Infovaticana has been seen as combative, as somewhat controversial. Is it fair to say that you've been critical of Pope Francis and his regime and the reforms that they are trying to implement in the church?
It wouldn't be exact to say that, Steve. We have been very critical with some behaviors and with some statements of Pope Francis, especially all the thing around Amoris Laetitia and the dubia. But it's also true that we have shown ourselves very happy with other statements of Pope Francis. For example, the last month, the general audiences for Francis have been fine for us, have been beautiful about the Holy Mass, about the confession. We cannot be considered as enemies of the Pope. I think that those who have to be considered as enemies of the Pope are those who try to say or to explain that the Pope is supporting their radical positions on marriage, on human being. I'm thinking, for example, in Cardinal Casper, which last week explained that Amoris Laetitia is very clear about marriage and about divorce. He is an enemy of the Pope. We are not. We just try to serve the church where we think that we have to serve the church. And the way that we, in our discernment, think that we have to serve the church. For other people, inviting Paul Elric to the Vatican is serving the church. And for us, writing those, the way as you do in OnePeterFive. This is the way that you, Steve, and I, as laymen, with our children, with our families, serve the church.
So, Gabriel, if you're not an enemy of the Pope, if your criticism is balanced and not excessive, why do you think it is then that the Vatican is targeting you and your work, your website, this very serious lawsuit that you're facing from one of the largest law firms in the world on behalf of Cardinal Parolin and the Vatican Secretariat of State, which comes across in a way as an attack on, as you said, this is the way you serve the church. It looks like they're targeting you and attacking your work. Why do you think they're doing that?
I'm sorry, because I think that because of my poor English, there was a misunderstanding. Of course, it comes from Rome. Of course, it's Secretary of State who has hired Baker McKenzie. What I meant is that I don't think that the first complaint comes from them, the first initiative. Okay? But of course, it's not. It's of course now a Vatican issue and not a Spanish issue. Il Giornale reported that someone not identified in the Vatican told them that they didn't want us to generate confusion. It's fun, no? It's fun. I'm sure that for you it's fun to hear someone in the Vatican of Francis accusing us to generate confusion and not another thing. But apart from that, which is tragical, of course they are against us. Of course, it's the Secretary of State who wants to close us, who wants us to disappear, and they have written that in different burofaxes that you have read, Steve. So of course they want us to close. If someone can think that Infovaticana is official from the Vatican, that person should better not read New York Times, because they will think that it's Michael Bloomberg, or who is the mayor of New York now, who is behind the website. There, of course, shouldn't read Vatican Insider, conducted by the fantastic journalist Andrea Tornielli. They would think that it's from the Vatican, or the same Scalfari, which is a close friend of the Pope, is the director of a newspaper called La Repubblica. Does anyone think that La Repubblica is an official newspaper from the Repubblica d'Italia?
So what are you planning to do next? I mean, what's the next move? Are you going to change your name? Are you going to capitulate further? Do you fight this? Do you have a chance to win if you fight this? What is it that you think, is the next thing that you're going to do, and what do you think the outcome of all of this might be?
First of all, I want to explain that Baker McKenzie offered us a negotiation. He told us very fairly that the Vatican wanted to reach an agreement with us. So we did the best proposal that we could do. It was that we were going to change the trademark, the law we have done. We were going to write something under the law to explain that it's a private lay initiative. Started in Madrid in 2013, and they told us that it was not possible to reach an agreement unless we disappeared. The only agreement was to disappear, to close Infovaticana.com, Infovaticana.com, and to start, if we wanted to, another website. It's not an option for us. We are going to fight. We're going to resist this, that we think it's very unfair from them. It's not correct. And last of all, I want to mention a similar case that took place in the United States. A journalist started a blog called Goldman Sachs 666.com. Goldman Sachs started a similar procedure against them. And he won. He won because they stated that he was acting correctly. So we think that we have good options to win, but obviously they have the best lawyers, and we are ourselves.
Well, Gabriel, I wish you the best. I think all of our readers wish you the best in this fight. I appreciate you taking the time to come on and talk about this, especially because I know you were concerned about your ability to express these concepts in English. Believe me, your English is so much better than my Spanish, which has been rusty for many, many years. So thank you very much for joining us to explain this situation.
Thank you very much, Steve. I'm sorry because these are issues that require to be treated with very, 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 very accuracy, you know, because it's very important to remark, for example, that it's not the church who is fighting against us. It's the Vatican. The Vatican is a state composed by men, which has less than a century of history, and which actually, yes, the responsible of the state, the chief of the state is the Pope, but it's not the church, it's the Vatican. The Vatican has also pharmacy, has also a supermarket, and has a Department of State, the Secretary of State, but it's not the Catholic Church, it's not the Pope, it's not my bishop, my ordinary. So I don't have to obey an order from a functionary who works in a bureau. But to sum up, just thank you very much. It's difficult, it's a hard fight, but I think that we are doing what we have to do and what God wants us to do. I hope that we will win this trial, and Infovaticana will do what is most important. We'll continue reporting that what's happening in the Spanish Church and in the Vatican. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Gabriel. God bless you. Bye-bye. You've been listening to the OnePeterFive podcast. This has been a production of OnePeterFive Incorporated, copyright 2018, all rights reserved. If you have downloaded this podcast through iTunes, we encourage you to go there and leave us a review to help others find and enjoy our show. If you would like to support our work, go to OnePeterFive.com/donate to make a tax-deductible contribution. This not only helps to pay for web hosting and the fine content we provide, but keeps food on our tables, coffee in our cups, and the lights on, which really helps us see what we're doing. Until next time, I'm Steve Skojak. Thanks for listening.